Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colin Malley, and I'm the Fort Moore Garrison Commander. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce the United States Army Forces Command Team. Combined, they have over 64 years of leadership to our Army and lead the Army's largest organization of over 730,000 soldiers and 13,000 civilians. General Andrew Pappas has served in a variety of command and staff assignments throughout his 35-year military career. He currently serves as the 24th Commanding General of the United States Army Forces Command. Prior to assuming command of FORSCOM, General Pappas served more than 3 years as a senior leader on the Joint Staff, first as the Director for Operations and later as the Director of the Joint Staff. Command Sergeant Major T.J. Holland has served in every leadership position from squad leader to Command Sergeant Major over his 29 years of military service. Command Sergeant Major Holland has deployed in support of Joint Task Force Liberia, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Resolute Support. Prior to assuming his position in FORSCOM just last Friday, Command Sergeant Major Holland served as a Command Sergeant Major for the 18th Airborne Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present the FORSCOM Command Team, General Pappas and Command Sergeant Major Holland.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a privilege to be here for Sergeant Major Holland and myself. And this is an important forum, so Curtis, thanks for putting this together, because as professionals, we have to get together and have these intellectual dialogues about what it means for war fighting. And we talk about it at echelon. And it was a privilege today when you've got the acting chief of staff of the Army, the sergeant major of the Army, start laying out their priorities. And yeah, I agree with you. We got to get that acting title off. He's got to get confirmed because there's important business. We as a service have to move forward. And that's exactly what General George is doing. He's driving it. And what you heard from him on his four focus areas, the number one is war fighting. And that's why we're following him, because for Forces Command, that's all we focus on. Our responsibility is to fight and win that next fight, the first fight of the future. And we focus nothing more than on readiness, from the newest private up to the highest echelon of that theater army, and how we're prepared for each one of those fights.
Hey, sir, thanks. I would say there's no better place to be right now than amongst friends and talking warfighting. As you mentioned, sir, really our number one priority and why we exist as Forces Command. As I was introduced, I just came out, prestigious career going on through, just serving with a bunch of you in the room who made me who I am today. Most recently, as the 18th Airborne Corps CSM, 6 no-notice deployments. So you talk about being ready and fighting tonight, being on call, Nation's Watch. That's what we're asking everybody here to really be, through their career, just starting off, whether whatever side of the room, or you've dealt it and you've lived with it throughout your entire career. I'm excited to be on stage and engaging with all you today, and looking forward to some great questions that we'll have towards the end. Sir.
Thanks. When we talk about war fighting, that clarity has left our visibility for a little bit as of recently. When I took battalion command, brigade command, even division command after the last 20 years of continuous conflict, one of the opening statements I always said was, our future is written. Why? Because I could have told you when we're deploying, where we're deploying to, the human terrain, the physical terrain. We got to do a PDSS, and things were very set and very clear. But I'll tell you, you don't have that luxury. It is a much more uncertain environment. There's much more complex threats that are out there that we are facing every day. But that means that our readiness must increase exponentially to meet those worldwide. Now, it's not a unique point in history, and I've used this before, but I'll take you back to, say, June of 1914. And you're sitting in a little Paris cafe, Sergeant Major, you're wearing the skinny jeans of the day, relaxing. It's a time, socially, economically, environmentally, everything was uplifting. It was a happy time throughout that area. Then what happened on June 28th? Two bullets changed the trajectory of the world, and the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. By July 28th, within 30 days, war is declared. By August 4th, German forces crossed the border. World War I's committed. So within a period of a month, from calm and prosperity, the world is cast into war. 3 years later, the United States enters. 4 years later, the war ends. 20 million dead, over 120,000 Americans, at a time frame that nobody had predicted at that time. And I bring that up because I always ask, are we on the same precipice of an event today? And why is that? You just take a look around the world, and those of you that have served in different COCOMs at the time, you know our operating environment. Just look at the Indo-PACOM AOR. If you're Charlie Flynn or Emirate Aquilino, every time we do a freedom of navigation through the Taiwan Straits, the Chinese see that as an incursion into their sovereign territory. You've seen North Korea continue to fire their ballistic missiles and their intercontinental ballistic missiles in order to test them, flying those over Japan. Each one we see as an incursion into the threat. Go no further than the Ukraine when the Russians came across last year. And what we didn't know at the time was, were we going to have an Article 5 violation that was going to cast NATO into a fight, because an attack on one is an attack on all of us. We didn't know the end state of that operation, that we had very exquisite intelligence that would have cast us into a war. And if you've been operating the CENTCOM AOR over the last year, there's been over 110 direct attacks on U.S. locations and forces. And those of you who were out there during the time frame of Soleimani when he was taken down, you know from that response, from the Iranian response went into Al-Assad another way. If you were there that night, we were one heartbeat away from going up an escalation ladder and going into war. So yes, are we on the precipice? Absolutely. So that's why it's absolutely imperative that our readiness and our preparedness is at the forefront of all we do. So as we talk about that from the FORSCOM perspective, we recognize that, and we have an approach to it, and we call it the 4 wins. And when we discuss those, they're not prioritized, but they're imperative of every formation. And as you look at your formation, you'll assess where you need to apply it. Like any main effort, it can shift during the execution or your timeline of your command horizon. But you can see what they are here. But since this is the maneuver conference, we're going to start to talk about winning the first fight and move forward from there. So this is imperative for all of us. And as we walk through this, Command Sergeant Major and I, what we'd like to do, I'm a year into command. When I was here last year, we were still within the first 90 days of our assessment. Since that time, we've been able to refine it and put forward these 4 wins in order to move forward. So what I'd like to do as we move forward, Sergeant Major and I are going to talk about where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going to move forward from a FORSCOM perspective of preparing for the next fight.
Well, sir, you think about where we've been and where we are today and where we're going. You think about the operational tempo, right? The demand on the force. We look at what the geographical commands ask of your Army to do day in and day out. With that high op tempo and that high demand comes a huge responsibility on all our leaders and all our soldiers to be ready every day, right? That's weapons qualification, integrated weapon training strategy, to collective action, to our capstone event, the CTCs. FORSCOM is, the largest command in the Army. You look at over 700,000 soldiers within that formation. You look at 3 corps, 9 divisions, 25 of the BCTs, and we also encapsulate 32nd Air Missile Defense Command, the Security Force Assistance Command, 20 Saberni, the CTCs themselves, which changed our Army post-Vietnam when you look at that. And then also we have Compo 2, Compo 3 responsibilities. The Reserve Command is part of our headquarters, right? We have training and readiness oversight of the National Guard. So huge responsibility on Forces Command, sir.
It is, and as we look at this, we talk about where we've been as an Army, and we saw this. And CTCs are a great area to assess really the competencies at echelon of where we're executing, up to the brigade, warfighters for division and above. But what we saw about a little over a year ago in our first touch point, as we got to the CTCs, we'd been focusing on foundational readiness. Absolutely necessary. My predecessor identified a gap where we'd gone to higher echelon training, and we weren't winning that first fight at the CTCs. Op4 was getting into our decision cycle and beating us. Foundational readiness. So when we got here, we got down to the CTCs, that dynamic changed. When I look at platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, company commanders, dominating that first fight, the battalion had set the conditions for that first fight, and we engaged, and we fought, and we won. But then we identified a little bit of a gap. Battalion commanders were forward in that fight, sometimes even brigade commanders. But that's not the echelon we needed to be. Where we found, though, as we'd focused on the foundational, we started to look at a gap that we had at echelon at our higher level headquarters. And what's the role of those headquarters? We know the captain's going to win that fight, that company fight that's forward. but the battalion has to have an ability to plan over different planning horizons. We have to identify those transitions and articulate it through the battalion to the brigade, even to the division, so that we can resource those transitions so that we don't let the enemy the ability to regroup, reconstitute, and then take the initiative again. So as we saw those gaps, we've been starting to work on how do we get our formations at echelon to synchronize those warfighting functions to enable those lower echelons to meet success. We're not broken. We've seen it in areas where when you do that, we continue to dominate. But it was enough that we needed to provide focus from the FORSCOM level, maintaining the foundational readiness. We're never going to lose that, so we win the first fight, but making sure our headquarters echelons are being predictive on the time horizons for the future fight.
Sir, some previous experiences when, I heard a lot of questions last about Ukraine's lessons learned, some of the things we're seeing at the combat training centers and what the commander just talked about. Winning at the point of contact. Whether you're the young sergeant at the tip of the spear as a rifle team leader and your span of control is 3 to 5 people and will make contact in the smallest element possible, the forward observer, the commander who's visualizing and engaging and leveraging resources to mass on a decisive point in time, we have to be able to win at that point of contact regardless of echelon and responsibility. In my experience watching from the beginning, being the 18th Airborne Corps forward deployed, watching the Ukraine-Russia fight kind of work its way out is, bottom line is, warrior tasks and battle drills work. Our doctrine is actually pretty good when applied, and we train to standard, and we expect a higher standard than what is norm, right? That stuff is there. Mastering the fundamentals is really important, right? And everybody in this room has a responsibility to do that and to be ready to fight and win like we advertise. NCOs are our primary trainers. We are all, whether you're sergeant or command sergeant major, we'll have sergeant in our title. Our center of gravity is a training environment. Training individuals, crews, and teams to be ready, right? We have to be there. We have to be with those soldiers and enforce those standards and discipline, right? We have to maintain these standards, and the level of mastery we need to incrementally increase. We got to get better. We get those steps and reps, but what's the measure of effectiveness, measure of importance, performance? You have to be there with the pulse of your formation. In the end, leadership is the most decisive element of combat power. Your soldiers cannot fight, win, survive, and thrive on the battlefield without someone they trust and will follow right off that cliff and be right there on your shoulder. Sir?
That's great. So for the past year, with our training guidance and the emphasis we place both on the CTCs and then some of the other training environments that we have, first we made a contract. If we go back to the days of the gated training strategy before we went to CTC, you had to get to the highest level of a live fire. That took us away from going back and retraining. And every year, about a third of your formation transitions over. We're making sure, and we're making the commitment, foundational training, squad platoon remains the foundation that we're going to continue to commit to. Now, through multi-echelon training, we've got to increase our componency and capability at that battalion and brigade. And we've seen that through execution and through the training methodology from the divisions on down to get those battalions up. And when the battalions elevate their capability, they put the demands on the brigade, which allows them to increase their competency. And we've seen an increase in that through the past year, through the CTCs, through the home station training, and we're continuing to build our competency. What we're also identifying as we're looking at transition is putting that demand on the brigade so that we're capable now of putting the demands in a LISCO fight up through the division and even to the theater army. And through this progression, we're identifying areas that we're going to have to transition staff functions from the brigade, which used to be our principal tactical formation, through GWAT. It's now transitioning to the division. So what capabilities have to move from the brigade up to the division, and what new capabilities have to be brought into the division as we fight in new domains that we didn't have previously. And we continue to push through that. And once we get to that level, I think it is a 2 to 3 year progression. We're moving the battalions. We're going to get to brigade within this next year, and over the next 2-3 years to the division. And we'll talk about that as we look to the future.
Sure. The story here is we have to be lethal. Regardless of warfighting function, regardless of MOS or branch or skill, in large-scale combat operations, you have to be called upon to do the most foundation thing that you've been trained to do. And if that's pick up a rifle, you pick up a rifle, and you shoot expert when you can, right? And you have to be basically a multi-tool athlete, right? 5-tool athlete as in baseball. Don't be just good at that one thing. You still have to be a warfighter when it all comes down to it, right? If you read anything with the Russian and Ukrainian incursion, that everybody, they're in contact. They're fighting to win and survive their nation, right? They have a will to fight. You have to have we all have a strong will to fight. We're Americans. We're the best army. That's who we are. Right? Presence matters. Everybody in here is expected to be present for duty at 0630 to start the one great thing we do every day, PT, right? That's fantastic. You're present and you're accounted for. But you have to have a presence, right? A type of leadership where people trust you and that you show a little bit of empathy and also hold people accountable and to a standard. You have to be with your formation. Readiness doesn't happen by accident, right? It requires hard work and effort by everybody to kind of build the team that we're looking for to win whatever's today, tonight, or the Army of 2030. And First Sergeant and Sergeant Major, you're a primary trainer, right, of your formation. When I'm sure everybody's here been present in a change of command, and we're passing a set of colors around or a guideline, and it says the undersigned in accordance with AR 600-20 assumes command. If you haven't broke open that regulation and you look at where your commanders actually authorities are, because when you look at whether it's Sergeant Major, First Sergeant, all the way down to a squad leader, what our authorities are, not a lot. It's very ambiguous. We derive a lot of our responsibility from our commanders' authorities, right? They entrust and empower us to be the best NCO Corps in the world. So you better crack the books and take a look at it and be subject matter experts in doctrine and regulation and policy, right? And it's not just training. It's also maintaining, right? There's one thing on your training calendar that's always there and it's always resourced. That's PT, right? We do the routine things well, right? And one of those things needs to be maintenance, right? If you're present where your formation is, that's a training opportunity and it builds readiness. Sir.
So I'm going to ask you where we're going. New doctrine. As we shift out of GWAT, 3.0 came out. How many of you actually read it? You're all lying. Jim, I believe you. The rest of you, I believe it. Just like 600-20. But when you do read 3.0, or the key base for us is, we're elevating that principal tactical formation from the brigade to the division. That's imperative that you understand that, because that's the way we're going to fight in large-scale combat operations. Now, we haven't done that for 20 plus years, and even the formations of the 90s that reflect back to, those were great. They're built, but they're built for training, not for the war fighting. So we have to modify how we're going to do that. We also have to modify how we're training and preparing for that fight at these upper echelons. Again, I always go back to, because there's a concern I always get asked, so are we going to walk away from the foundational readiness, take time away from that platoon leader? No. But we have to be able to synchronize those warfighting functions, set the conditions at the higher level if we're going to meet success beyond that first engagement. And one way that we're going about doing that, in accordance with the 3.0, is first, I just talked about, you got to build the capacity. We got to find out where our gaps are. We are working and fighting in domains that we hadn't previously. Cyber, space. We've got new capabilities we have to bring in, especially when you're looking at mass is going to be built, through drone capability. So do we have that right level of competence in our headquarters and able to understand it? Now, you guys in the basic course and the advanced course that are here, it's probably the same. We used to have a chalkboard, probably whiteboard now, where you put all the capabilities that you have and you're going to employ it. Then as you employ it, you check it off. Bam, bam, my platoons, my mortars. We had the Rembass platoon. I laugh about that. You never knew you had it. Then they got compromised. Then you had to go find them. But you put that there. But we've got capabilities in our formation today that we don't even know about. We don't know how to employ it. We don't know the depth of the capability. So we have to build up our intellectual underpinning so that we bring everything to bear at one time. And then as a staff and commanders, we got to be able to understand how to synchronize that and who actually owns that capability so you can put the right demand with the effects necessary to meet success. That's part of the educational process. Now, we do that in a number of different ways that we're implementing it. Warfighters are great. Warfighters are great for divisions and above, and you get complementary training for the brigades that are supporting that. And warfighters really build a high level of competency of your staff proficiency. But one of the things that we're going to start projecting is, once we get that staff proficiency, when you're working off fiber, your comms work pretty well. But we got to take you out of that scenario. And if you need resupply and you hit a button 3 times, water arrives. But when you put that in the dirt and you get the friction of a live environment, it changes the dynamic. It changes the training environment, and lessons learned continue to increase. Because nature will turn on you at any moment. And we've seen that, and we've started to incorporate that where we're taking divisions and we're putting them out to the CTCs. Now, the brigade is still your primary training audience, so we don't want to interrupt with the training methodology to get to that higher level mental proficiency and expertise. But by taking the division out there and some of the functional brigades, and those functional brigades, we put a cab, we put the sustainment brigade that really goes to the field, out in the field, we put a HIMARS battalion and a MLRS battalion, and we put it in advance of the actual rotation to set conditions for that so that the division that gets challenged to do those long-range condition-setting operations that the division would be asked to do and challenged to do in the dirt. We did that with 3rd ID. 3rd ID was pretty excited to do that, I assure you, but they had gone through 3 warfighters, so we knew that they had a high level of staff expertise that we could then apply. So we're not teaching staff functions, but more applying those staff proficiencies in the field. And we've learned some great lessons out of that. 2 out-of-sector long-range air assaults going at distance of 120 kilometers, putting the demand on that cab commander, the commander, do I fart before or after the objective? What do I run in terms of risk in each one of those decisions? We actually, with our fires, how do we set up so we're firing the proper fires in support of those long-range assets? And in that same rotation, and the commander came back to me, the Davarti commander, their firing battery ran out of water, went black on water. And unlike hitting that button to resupply, he realized he needed an emergency resupply. The problem was, out of the sustainment brigade, the OR rate of that element that's supposed to resupply them was low, so they couldn't generate the trucks. So it starts teaching those lessons, the importance throughout every echelon, from driver to vehicle to the formation to having great accountability of where you're at. How do you fight that in the field and inducing that friction? And that requires, when you look at the new FORSCOM strategy that's coming out, it's brilliant, by the way, you might want to read that. It does get to that level of divisional level strategy as we continue to move forward.
So appreciate that because General Pappas kind of led in with what was going on in 1914 that started off the Great War, and we kind of turned things forward a little bit into 1918. Think about the tactics that would be employed in Europe at that time frame. Speed that up a little bit. Now we're before World War II, and you got a French army that's got a Maginot Line that's considered one of the best armies of the world, one of the most professionals. They're locked in that 1918 doctrine because that's how they fought that Great War. Now think about what the Germans did. They had some good infantry, they had some good armor, they were building their Luftwaffe, and they took this new capability, right? This new technology called the FM radio, and they pulled it all together, right, to create mass at a decisive point in time, right, to be able to understand and visualize and outdecide the French army, and in 6 weeks, German army rolled right over the French army, right? Now look at where we're at today, what we've learned out of Ukraine and Russia and what we do in the Army. The integrated tactical network, right? That is the FM radio of today. Data-based or data decision-making, right? The art form to be able to outpace your adversary with the speed and relevance of decision-making. That's where we're at. That's the FM radio for us, the ITN, right? That is one of the great lessons learned that we kind of saw during watching all this and what we're able to do today, our Army being technology. Now, we know there's a lot of technology in some of our units, and it's really hard to stitch that all together, but that's what the ITN will hopefully do for us. Precision manning in this environment as far as data decision making. We all know we have an accessions concern right now. We know you're not going to be at 100%. The new active point manning gun is coming out. We're going to have to make some tough decisions. We have to get precise in our manning to make sure that the right units that are lying on the gift map to execute the missions that are required, right? Because there's a requirement out there for us to deliver readiness. You're going to get the right people at the right time to make sure you get the necessary capability to build your team, become lethal, hit that capstone event, the CTC or your warfighter, and deploy, fight, and win, right? Those lessons learned that I kind of introduced this portion on, right? We think about the Army of 2030, it starts now, right? You can't wait until 2030 for a new piece of kit or technology to arrive to make you lethal in 2030. We have to start thinking and employing those techniques and updating our doctrine with the relevance and speed of battle. Now, we can't over-rotate what we're seeing there, right? But that's just one laboratory we can use to kind of see and kind of fuse these things. You heard the chief talk, or General George talk about, how we have to change our acquisitions model and all those other things. We're learning all those lessons now. We have to outpace our adversary with the speed of decision making. Sir.
Thank you. And as I talked about, the warfighters set the foundation. Scenarios for the list are extremely complex. And we're going to take these divisions to the dirt. We also have to higher echelon some of our training scenarios that we have. And this is where we're incorporating the theater army. And when we look at the last two core warfighters that we had, we're tying those into our O plans, whether in Europe or over Indo-PACOM. And they're getting much more complex. We're driving a very different approach to the warfighting to really stress the core to put the demand on that theater army. And I'll just use, X is here today, and X, the last one that they've done, you talk about complexity. We want to stress them. We don't want to fight divisions, individual brigade fights. We want to fight it as a division, so you get the effects of the mass. The same thing with the Corps. So the last warfighter that First Corps just did, it starts off with 3 different joint force entries: air assault, airborne, and a maritime. Synchronized in time and space and trying to make sure that all your joint enablers are setting those conditions and making the prioritization decisions. That was just to start off, and then fighting your way up in a very deliberate manner. That's hard. And what General Brunson did is he did it with a distributed C2 network, because we've also learned that we can't maintain the large TOCs that we had previously because they're targetable. Same things we're incorporating in our CTC with the brigades. If you're big, you don't exist. If you use your cell phone, you don't exist for long. And we're working that at the core level, and now we're synchronizing that so that we can make sure that our higher echelon during the core warfighters are the theater armies, because we have to be able to work at echelon. First point of contact with that squad, all the way up to the theater army in time and space. That's imperative if we're going to win an LSCO fight. And when you hit the CTC, it's no longer 2 aircraft are an air assault or 6. We're putting full battalion of lift out there so we can get to those higher level collective tasks to meet success. And as we look even to the future, what we want to get to is where we take a full division, go back to the Louisiana maneuvers before World War II, and we take a full division and put it in the dirt. The 3 maneuver brigades, your functional brigades, the higher, and give you the time and space to fight as a divisional fight. We've got to get out there and do that in the dirt. Is it expensive? Absolutely. But it's something that we have to do if we're going to get to that level of proficiency moving forward.
Sir, we talked a lot about, readiness and lethality. And in the beginning, I talked about how large FORSCOM is and our level of responsibility and the training oversight and the relationship we have with our Compo 2, Compo 3 brothers. We can't go along and fight and win unless we're doing it as a total army, right? The critical capabilities and that we have in our functional, multifunctional brigades and other divisions that are within Compo 2 and Compo 3 and the sustainment formations, we're dependent to fight and win as a total army. Now, we're going to have opportunities to train together at our CTCs and our warfighters. I know General Pappas has asked the Corps commanders to include some of the divisions, how we're aligning some to really help upgun or to upskill to get to more lethal and build better relationships. That goes on the human dimension of really an interoperability within our own formation, right? We have to get back to that. That's how we survive. Guard, Reserve, Compo 2, Compo 3, we got you in the audience. Thank you for what you do and what you bring to the fight. And thank you for your families, right? Because we know some of you might be, whether you're AGR or whatnot, and you're wearing uniform full time, and some or you got your AT. We know the additional challenges and complexity you do to kind of help deliver what we need as far as critical capabilities. Whether you're an ECAB or you're another fires brigade, your division, you're in a sustainment formation or other capability, we need you all to be just as ready as the active component. So thanks for what you do.
Yeah. And a key part to that, when we look at the reserve component, we look at winning the future fight. We talked about the current fight and then winning the first fight. But the future fight entails both our modernization and the full incorporation of all 3 compos into that fight. And part of the modernization challenge we have today, whether it's through rearm or other, is the demands on the Army today continue to increase. And you see that worldwide with what's placed upon us. And that's because there's commands, the commands have requirements put upon them by the Secretary of Defense, And they said, to meet those requirements, here's the resources we need. And here's where you get that long-term friction of the temporal nature of the fight. So China, pacing threat, no doubt, today and into tomorrow. The acute threat's Russia. But the resources we put out there today, what we also have to do is how do you balance the risk of today with the risk of the future fight? And what do I mean by that? So as long as we maintain a lot of forces forward, your modernization phase comes at risk. And our concern is as we push with the visibility of the future, we need to modernize our force. We've got capability right now that we can put into the force. You just need time so that we can be resourced, manned, trained, and ready to put into the fight. But we've got to look at our op tempo, because if you can't do that, my concern is that we're going to fight that fight in 3-5 years. But if we don't modernize, it's going to be with the same equipment you have today, but just with one hell of a lot more miles on it. So we've got to work that. And that's a difficult balance. It's at the senior strategic level of risk today, risk to the future. Additionally with that, Ukraine's a great example. When you look at our Compo 2 and 3 capabilities, when the combatant commander out of EUCOM first requested resources and support when the Russians came across, we were able to surge our Title 10 capabilities. All Compo 1 went into the fight. But we didn't have authorities to get into the reserve and the guard. And since our combat support and service support, a large component of that resides in those two compos, you found that the combatant commander did not receive all that he was able to ask for, all that he asked for, because we didn't have access to that capability during the year of execution. So we've got to really look at what is our balance. What is it we're going to need to fight first 90 days, second 90 days, and long-term operational capabilities over the duration of a fight? Are we balanced properly? And are those formations ready to go when called upon? When we look at our training methodology, we've made a few adjustments when it comes with Compo 2 and 3. First, modernization. You know, the 278th out of Tennessee, they're getting the new Abrams before some of our active duty. Why? Look at tip fit. They've got to be modernized. When we talk about future vertical lift, Compo 2 and 3 are going to be on higher prioritization, some active duty. Same with other capabilities. We've got to modernize as a total Army. Additionally, we've got to train as a total Army. And a couple ways that we're doing that, you know, we do a 2 to 3 year long, it's the ASAR conference where we synchronize capability. Patrick Matlock's in charge of that. We run it for him. But in doing that, we want to find opportunities to bring in, if it's an armor brigade that's going out to the NTC, if we can't generate a full armor brigade out of the Guard, we can get an armor battalion so that they can train with us, nest with us, and be utilized as such. Same thing with combat support and service support organizations. Get them nested into our rotational, in the dirt, training with us, elevate all's competency, because when the call comes, we're all going to go together. And what we don't have is is a 3-year time frame to sit in England to build our capability before we go on to the mainland. We've got to be ready to fight tonight through all 3 compos, and that interdependency is there. And remember, almost half of the divisions of the Army are within the National Guard. And one of the areas that we saw is we're building competencies in a LISCO fight for the division to be your tactical principal formation. We found that there is a capability gap of training Guard divisions. And the tags realize that. The tags aren't manned, resourced, or have the expertise to train Guard divisions. Who does? You know, C.D. Donahue, X. Brunson, Sean Bernabe, they're right here. So we've gone to the ability to take the Guard divisions, all of them, and nest them underneath our corps. And we own that responsibility to work a training methodology to get their divisional capabilities up and build their competence so they can fight in that LISCO fight. Because our war plans, we need them. And it's hard for a Guard division. Imagine if you're in the Title 32, and for the Guard guys out there, you're a division commander in this state, so you answer to your tag. But your down trace units, your brigades, are all in different states, and their readiness is tied to that tag until you're federalized. They're working extremely well, and John Jensen is an incredible partner, and he's working that so it's collaborative. The tags acknowledge it. They accept that responsibility to build up the competence of the down trace unit so that when it does come together and fight as a division, that they're ready to fight at the same level of expertise. But what we owe them, and the Corps commanders are driving that, and you see that in the MRBs, is a training path for each one of those subunits to elevate all of that competency, to elevate providing the modernization so we can fight as a combined team. The one thing I want to transition to, and it's the number one, and I hit this one last because this is the human dimension of warfare. And this is winning trust and empowering our leaders. We've got to have those fighting forces that always win. That starts with that human component. It's setting the conditions for success. It's making sure that we are taking care of our formations. We're training our formations. We're executing those lower level tasks, not just till you get it right, till you can't get it wrong. It's setting those conditions where through shared hardships, shared successes, it's that cohesive and winning fighting force that you have out there. And I brought up last year, we've had some challenges because you go back to the time of COVID and you recall this, you guys out there, I mean, you took accountability by text. We did PT by text because we ordered some of our junior leaders, all of our leaders, you can't come together. You know, and I tell the joke, it's great. You know, Sergeant Major, I had my best marathon time ever. Texted him out. Just personal record. Challenge me on that. But what happened on that? Some of those dynamics that we have of leader engagement start to fall by the wayside. You start losing, how do you build trust if you don't see each other? If you don't know them, if you don't know their families? And I will tell you, engaged leadership is something that we have to drive. It has to be driven. And I go back to, it starts at 06:30 every morning in every one of your formations for PT. That is not the time you go get your teeth fixed, your car tire changed, or anything else. It's not just the physical fitness, but it's the event itself. And if you stand in that formation for 10 minutes prior, and then you can listen, if you're that team leader, squad leader, that's where you pick up on some of those intangibles of the family. You find out, you know, that Private Holland just bought a motorcycle, and you ask him, but you don't have a license. You know, you find out if there's challenges in the family the night before, because you talk about that. You know if somebody got liquored up the night before, because you can smell it and you can hear it, then you run it out of them. You also find out, you know, you find out if somebody's child just made the honor roll. But then you start to get to know the family, and you can hear that. And then at 6:30, you fall in, you salute the flag, you right face, and when you step off, you lead PT. And platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, company commanders, first sergeants, you're there. And one thing I tell you in that formation, I've talked to Sergeant Major about it. If you got to fall out and you're unable to do PT, and I got being broken, but you got to be, if that's a period of time, you got to get out of the formation. We don't need you leading troops because you can't lead where you can't go. It is a dynamic, involved leadership process. And that's got to take place through the day. So we've got to unencumber the company commanders and the platoon leaders from other tasks. So if you're out there, I don't care what tasks they're doing, team live fire, G2, S2 training, leaders need to be a part of that to oversee that. Use that experience and be a part of the training, impart that knowledge, enforce that standard. Presence has an impact and an influence all its own. That's why we have leaders there, part of the team. And I'll tell you, when you get done with a training event, like we've done, and I recall it as a young and we'd be at APL cleaning weapons, I'll give you a drink of cold beer and the camaraderie that's there. Don't let it end with that cohesive entity, that shared success you've just had. Then find a time to bring the families into it with an event on the backside. Find that opportunity for the single soldiers to be a part of it so that everybody gets to know each other and the team expands beyond those executing the task to those that are out there supporting it. It is a family event. Provide those opportunities out there to expand the aperture of the team. It's absolutely imperative. And the mentorship that's out there. And the other part to that is accountability. And Jim, where are you at, brother? I'm going to use your example of NTC. And this year I keep you anonymous, but I won't because you're right there in front of me. But it's anonymous. So I was told by a division commander. But NTC, he came to a vehicle. The commander of the vehicle, young NCOs, completely shaven, talking to him, how's it going on at NTC? And it's going well, great discussion, very professional, comes over to the driver, junior soldier in it, he's unshaven. And he asks the professor, do you have a profile, religious exemption? No. Why aren't you shaven? Fuck, sir, it's hot out here. Yeah, it's NTC, man. No water shortage. Now, Jim's a very This anonymous commander is a very good person. He knows he's not going to correct 20,000 individual soldiers, but he goes back to the team leader. Why aren't we enforcing standard? You live the standard. Why aren't we enforcing the standard? And as we all know in combat, it's not like, well, I'm in combat, I'm going to enforce that. Too late. If anything, it devolves. Strong leadership, enforcing the standard execution. And why? And it's this environment we're in today. I didn't live it. They're going to make a meme of me. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. And on top of that, if I continue to enforce this standard, or if I'm tough on them, they're going to launch a bunch of anonymous investigations. I get tied up. So I've got to make deliberate decisions as a junior leader what I'm going to enforce. What's really important? No. First, this fear of investigations. If you haven't had one, like I said, I'll put one on you so you can get over it. It's coming. And you'll be cleared, because you know, do not be intimidated to that. But it's incumbent on us, if we're going to tell junior leaders, and it's hard. Again, these guys come out of COVID, now we've got to teach them. And Jim did the right thing. Hey, Sergeant Major, we got a problem. This is an LPD event, and it doesn't just stop at the E4s, E5s, E7. I'm talking platoon leaders, company commanders, all the way up. We've got to set the environment that they know that if you enforce the standard that we're telling you to do, that you will be supported as a leader. You do it properly, and you're going to be supported. Let's overcome this stigma, because we have to do that if we're a standards-based Army, and we're going to elevate our level of proficiency, and everybody understands what right looks like. Jim, did I get it right? Thank you, anonymous man. But we've got to do that. And there's a number of other examples like that, but it erodes our capability if we don't support our junior leaders. If they are fearful of actually implementing this, and it's leveraged against them. We've got to stop that. At the 4-star level, the command sergeant major's level, we'll support you. Do it right, we're going to support you. Standards-based Army. We've got to drive that. Because that's accountability. That's accountability down and accountability up. It's imperative. And the last thing I'll leave when we talk about this is mentorship. And I bring this up. Take that opportunity, no matter what rank it may be. I used to tell field grades, hey, don't make people come up and kiss the ring. You've got a lot of experience. Reach out, mentor them. The impact you have is imperative. Because you change lives, you change decisions, you set the example of what right looks like and put them on a path. And I bring it up because in this audience, Colonel G.D. Dorman's out there. And I'm not sure where he's sitting because it's too bright up here. But I'll tell you, you talk about having an impact. When I was a brand new captain, showed up at the 82nd, he was a field grade I fell under. And this is at the time out of the academy. They're letting us go at 3 years because we just won the War of Europe. And you're making these decisions. But when you have a senior leader that takes the time, here's what the Army's about. Not just the specific tasks, but here's what right looks like. Here's the way to approach it. Here's what a leadership environment that you can work under, that you grow in. That impacts you. I'm standing up here as a 4-star when I was thinking about getting out as a captain because of that man. And he's in the audience. I want to thank him. But I always go back to that example because the impact that you have as a leader, never walk away from that, because the impact that you're going to have sets the environment for the entire formation that you're in charge of, whether it's a squad, a platoon, or all the way up to a theater army. Take the opportunity to mentor people. That's engaged leadership, never walking away from it.
Sure. Thanks for telling an NTC story, because you heard me mention leadership is the most decisive element of combat power, right? From sergeant to command sergeant major, NCOs have to enforce standards. All policies, all regulations, trained to the doctrinal standard, right? We don't need leaders, non-commissioned officers who pick and choose which standard to enforce. It's all the time. That's who we are, right? Commanders, leaders, they have the authority, 600-20. Trust and empower your non-commissioned officers, right? Put us on the X. We want that responsibility to train and enforce standards. And if we're not living up to those standards, do something about it, right? Every day is selection. Leader development. It's our responsibility. It's one of our core responsibilities to make future leaders in our Army, right? There are battalion brigade CSMs in this room. There's a bunch of commanders out there. Is there a commander out there that doesn't need another good sergeant or staff sergeant? That first group, battalion CSMs, brigade CSMs, we're responsible for making sergeants and staff sergeants for our Army, right? Teach, coach, mentoring, developing, and making those junior NCOs. Leader development is every day. You don't have to specify it on a training calendar. We do it every day. It's kind of like, I may not be having a 48-56 out right now, we're not counseling, right? But this is a coaching moment. This is Pro D right now, right? So we have a responsibility to develop our future leaders. At one point I was out there sitting amongst you, now I'm up here talking to you guys, right? There's a lot of people who poured a lot of leader development to help make me successful. So just kind of remember that, reciprocate, it's our responsibility. Because again, everyday selection, you're on the X, right? I want to thank everybody for what you do every day. It's challenging and an ambiguous environment, but that's okay. We live ambiguity, we excel, we love it, we thrive, right? But again, thanks for what you do every day up to this point. Sir.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Before we open the questions, I'll tell you, FORSCOM doesn't have a monopoly on readiness. Every leader at echelon, every person in this audience is responsible for readiness at your echelon, both down and leading up. We focus on it. That first fight, that's what keeps us awake at night. That's what we talk about every day. And that's the importance of this forum. Because that fight is on the horizon. It is coming. It's not just an academic argument, but it's preparation for what that's going to look like and being prepared, whether it's an ambiguity and the flexibility that we provide as a nation to deploy anywhere and when. Thank you very much. Ready to take your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and transition to the Q&A. Again, I invite you to move to a microphone that is close to you. Sergeant Major, I'll go ahead and start it off with the first one here. Given the Army's challenges with recruiting causing readiness issues and balancing ready forces to contend with active conflict in Europe and contentious relationships in the Pacific, you gentlemen talk to us about what you believe the greatest challenge is to readiness currently.
I'll lead off with that. So the challenge that we have, and you have the division commanders right here, that we're overstructured as an Army. We're a 485-person Army, and we have 450,000 people. So when you look at the formations of our own readiness model, your personnel manning of that. And unlike an NFL team, if you lose a lineman, they're going to bring another lineman in. If you lose a person now, they're not deployable, you don't have a replacement in your formation. So your squad's going to be decremented a bit, and that affects your ability to execute. So that's my biggest concern, is having full formations that have trained. And we also have this carousel of leadership with that. I said we're 4,000 lieutenants over strength. Why? Because of that structure at the top. In order to have majors and lieutenant colonels, we have to grow lieutenants. You don't have a headhunter that's bringing in majors at that echelon, so we got to grow them. But what impact does that have? So I was in one of the divisions, and when you've got that many, when you're 160% this maneuver lieutenants, you're getting 9 months, at most 12 months as a platoon leader. Company commanders, 12 to 18 months. That's not enough time to become experts in your profession. It's just not. You've got to have time to develop that. And who knows what cycle you're in. That concerns me. So we've got to stop this carousel leadership. And it happens on the non-commissioned officer side too. I ask soldiers, how many squad leaders have you had or team leaders in the last year? How many platoon leader, new faces? As we talk about engaged leadership and building trust, that's built over time. You want to see units that have a low level of incidents in a formation. Why? I'll go to regiment, because that squad leader's been there for 2.5 years. First, he's a professional in the technical expertise, but he knows the human dimension. So he can be predictive and stop things as they come. And they have trust to come to him when there's problems. That's a huge part. Those are intangibles of leadership. So the personnel shortages are having effects throughout our formation. So what are we doing? I just told you a problem that's out there and a concern that we have as leaders and talk about. First, you got to focus on what the SecDef told you to do. The SecDef the gift map tells you these are the formations you're going to deploy. You talked about the 5 and 2 to Europe, the rotation on the Korean Peninsula. Those forces that are going forward that the SecDef said going to execute forward, they've got to be manned. And they've got to be manned in time that they can be trained to that higher level of competency so they can execute their task forward. And in doing that, we call it precision manning now. If you've got, it is often the 10 series, new soldiers coming out of basic. When we're about 6 months out from a rotation, we're taking a whole class out of the basic, where we used to give them to a division, then you put 10 per brigade. Hey, all 30 of those are going to this brigade that's deploying. And we want to get them there in time so though they won't have been there through the entire training cycle, but they're there to become incorporated into the team, trained up, and understand what their tasks are and be part of the team as they deploy. We're also changing YMAVs, where before, HRC's here, they said, hey, you've got 2 years as a commander, you're going to come out at that time frame. It could be in the middle of a deployment. Or if you're a senior lieutenant or now a company commander, they say, hey, you've got to leave the advanced course because it's a summer course. Well, that's disruptive to the deployment. Our piece is we're taking it out of the admin side and we're giving it to commanders and say that formation, when it deploys, is locked in to deployment plus X. And that's everybody, battalion commander down to private. And if there's a demand for recruiters or drill sergeants, the demand goes to the division. You fill it, but it's not by name out of the deploying unit. Now, the expectation is the commander then comes back at echelon and says, okay, I've got 32 company commanders at brigade level. I'm going to let these 5 rotate out so that I can get new blood coming in. So, it's not pedantic where nobody leaves, but commanders will dictate, and I've got these senior NCOs I'm going to let go off to these courses. But it's commanders making the decision because they're the ones that own the risk of execution. Does it put a demand and friction on our management of training? Absolutely. Absolutely. But if your premier element is winning and fighting in the fight here, and that's the formation on the field, then that's got to be the focus to make sure that it stays a cohesive component. And that's what we're adjusting to in order to mitigate that. Now, downstream effect, if we're putting all those formations and we're sure people are ready, and we're going to elevate these to 95% before they deploy, drop 10 for non-deployable, if you're not on a gift map mission, your manning is going to go down lower, which means your readiness is going to go down until you pick up a mission. You got to pay somewhere. So we're going to absorb some risk on non-deploying units on a cycle to focus on those that have a SecDef directed mission.
So, sir, question is about, you mentioned a lot about units being in the dirt and the CTCs. This question's about, with CTCs and warfighters becoming more complex to keep pace with a changing operational environment, what do you see are the requirements for the home station training, sir? Is that being extended, or how does that adjust?
I'll touch on it kind of at the higher collective, and I'll hand it to Sergeant Major. You're fortunate because you got the CTC commanders right here and the adjustments they're making to our CTC to the operating environment to reflect, the changing character of war going forward. And that's a good touch point. Now, everybody's back 40 on training isn't the same, nor can we afford to make every base have an operating environment that reflects that of our CTCs, capstones. But what we can do, when we went away from brigade FTX's field training exercise at home station, a money decision years ago, unless you were an Earth Force that had that, we're putting that money back in. Because what we've seen on home station training, you've got to get to that higher level. I'll use the 101st as an example. They've done it 3 times now. You take the whole division to the field. Who usually doesn't go? We've gone out as battalions, brigades. When you take a division out, then you take your functional brigades that usually don't. They're operating back from the cantonment area. A sustainment brigade out in the field doing services. You take the cab and make them operate from separate different FOBs, or however you want to establish it, in the field, doing maintenance and maintaining yourselves in the field. These are skills that we've got to bring back. First, I'll use the 101st again as an example. The first time they did that, it was a trail of tears. Why? Because if you haven't gone to the field for a while, we forgot how to fill our tricons, what you need. Connexes, what comes forward. So as you're out there, suddenly you're realizing, holy shit, I haven't done this in 10 years. We didn't have our load plans. We didn't do our checks. We didn't know exactly what it entailed. So you saw, and they accepted this, a couple, driving back every night or calling back. Third iteration, you don't see that as much. So we're maturing as a force. And then also as a division commander, brigade commander, when the formation's out there, as we talk about getting to the higher echelon training and multi-echelon, those are formations in the field that are putting demands on your headquarters in that field environment. So it forces those staff's functions to progress, battalions, brigades, up to the division in the field. So it is multi-echelon training without taking away from the ability, so soldiers aren't just sitting around to make sure the division trains. They have their own training plans that are out there, so they're executing, whether it's live fires or whatever it may be, so that you're getting that multi-echelon training, but it's focused and making sure everybody gets to that higher level of proficiency.
As a former ops group sergeant major, you can tell you go through a couple rotations, and then you've been through a rotation yourself, and then as a division and corps sergeant major going to the CTC rotations, and you see the CTC trends, like, why aren't we erasing some of these? right? Those CTC trends are supposed to inform us at home station training to get after that collective actions to really kind of eliminate those things. We can't just keep going over and seeing the same thing year rotation after rotation, year after year. We have to get after that. And that's where we do it. We do it at home. We do it in the dirt, right? That's kind of the whole importance of it. And even better, you kind of sprinkle in about some of the things we're seeing out in the world and how we're ingesting those or inside the rotations to make things more challenging, really turn on that rheostat up and down. Fighting at night. We have to start at home. Congratulations, you did a day live fire. Hey, HIMARS battery, you put the shades down. Did you really shoot at night? Did you start off in the assembly area, actually maneuver your ground force to your PAA? Did you assault through and seize that terrain before you started shooting from that location and put in security, all those things? Or did you just do your table, whatever certification drill? Do you have the right equipment to fight at night? Do you have all the sustaino in your formation? Does it reside there? Is it maintained and ready? We learn that at the home station because we pull it all out of the arms room, supplier rooms, and motor pools, and we roll out, and we actually find out, hey, are we equipped? Are we ready? And can we do it? Right? And that's the importance of home station training.
Sir, we'll transition to another question. We have a number of future company and troop commanders in the audience when it comes to the advancement of technology, looking for some advice and some thoughts on how they best prepare their formations for these changes.
With the advancements of technology and capabilities?
So I kind of, so it's additive, right? For future company troop battery commanders out there that are going in your formation, pick whatever it is, infantry rifle company, combined arms, wherever you're going, right? You already heard me talking like, hey, our tactics, our doctrine works when we employ it, right? So your responsibility is out there, is going out there, whether it's crews, sections, squads, platoons, is mastering the fundamentals, be able to actually maneuver and fight at night. Right now, Russia, Ukraine, nobody's maneuvering and fighting and winning at night. We own the night. You have to build that readiness. The technology that we're going to look at is adding into your formation, whether it's integrated tactical network, whether it's tethered drones, massing robotics, you're still going to do a breach of a mine wire obstacle. How is technology going to help you, right? You might use an autonomous or semi-autonomous drone to make sure that's the right location. Can I use a droppable munition? Instead of using sappers to go up to breach the wire, can we use robots to do that, right? So the smallest, when you make contact with that smallest element, does it have to be the sergeant? Can it be a robotic? Whether it's terrestrial, airborne, sub-T, submersible, whatever. That capability will probably come to you. Now it's our responsibility as senior leaders to make sure that we got your organizational structure and you got the training, the new equipment fielding and training necessary to employ it in the right environment. That's my thoughts on it.
I think he hits it right, but I think if I'm a commander coming in the first sergeant, I go back to that chalkboard approach. There's an academic and intellectual exercise that you have to put to there. You have to understand what those capabilities are and then how you're going to apply them to the fight. If you don't know their capabilities or limitations, then no matter how much technology we bring and you don't bring it to bear, then we're leaving something on the sideline. Additionally, having understanding the operating environment, what the enemy brings to bear, and then how do you mitigate the risk that provides in the close fight that you're going to be there. As a maneuver element, you're going to close with and destroy the enemy. You just have different tools in which you're going to have to apply to that and understand what tools the enemy is going to apply towards you.
Sir, Sergeant Major, we have time for one more question. I'm going to go to microphone 1, please.
Hello, sir. I'm Captain Graco Charadino. I'm from Kosovo Army. So my question is for the multi-domain readiness. So which one is the U.S. Army primary priority, and how is the U.S. Army simultaneously doing this with the international army to raise their readiness?
I'm not sure I understood the depth of your question.
Okay.
You said multi-domain army.
Yes, the multi-domain dimension that you have defined. So which one is the U.S. Army's priority to first have this domain highest readiness, and then how are you doing this with the international armies that are your allies to raise their readiness at the same domain?
I'm not sure we prioritize a specific domain because you have to fight in all of them simultaneously. And if we're talking about the same domains that we've had previously, air, land, sea, but now space and cyber, you've got to be able to synchronize all those in time and space, otherwise you have a vulnerability that'll affect you in each one of them. So as I spoke before, how are we elevating that? We've got a higher level of competence, obviously, in those first three that we're used to fighting in, and our ability to apply our warfighting functions to each. I'd say in terms of priority, education into the cyber and space and determining at what echelon those belong, that's one of the areas that we're working at today. And then for the implementation, then building our technical expertise, whether in warrants or field grades, to flesh out the staff so that they're best implemented and synchronized at the staff function. Now, how we're doing that across with all of our allies and partners, I will tell you that we have an excessive capability that exceeds some of our allies and partners. So we're going to set the conditions by continuing to progress as we do as an American Army, and then where we find, because we found with some of our allies and partners, where we have similar capabilities, we elevate them along with us. But I'd ask, I'll look at CD as a lifeline. I don't see that there's a separate plan as an ally complete army that we're being elevated together. We're finding those pockets of expertise, whether it's in cyber, like we see in Ukraine, or the UK, or space, where we've got allies or partners that have a capability where we partner with more bilat than we do across a full allied approach to elevating full competencies. Is that fair, CD?
Yes, sir. I think the biggest thing is one, cultural, do you trust each other? The next is what is your procedure? You look at stuff that we've done recently, we use cloud, right? And if you trust me, that if I put a 10-digit grid into that cloud, all you need to know is there will be something there to shoot something at it, right? You'll need to know when that top secret request doesn't matter. You put it in the cloud, you pulled it out, you shot it, you killed the enemy. That is probably the way to really moving forward with what you described, general process laid out.
Thanks, CD.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question.
Sir, Sergeant Major, thank you for your comments today. Thank you for your leadership to FORSCOM, and we're going to begin the transition.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.